I got a curveball for you today. You're going to be shocked. I definitely was. Pretty sure this episode will blow your mind. Today, we're counting down the biggest female power ballads of all time. There's some serious scorchers in here. You're going to see Heart. You're going to see a lot of other great females. But here's the catch. There may be no such thing as a 100% female power ballad. Let's just say that someone else might have been pulling the strings. You'll see what I mean. There's some truly twisted stories here, though. There's the Toughest Nell's lead singer who was so desperate for a hit, she openly admitted she was selling out to get it. And then when the song was finished, she called it crap, even though it became one of their biggest hits. There's also the Turn It Up to 11 track about monsters getting it on. It was originally written for a musical and coveted by one of the most theatrical rock stars of all time, but he didn't get to sing it. Then there's the unlikely story of how an American exchange student armed with a cassette tape turned a European power pop duo into global superstars. Plus the school teaching duo who were teaching in the day and playing clubs at night till their power ballad rocked the 80s and they quit their day jobs. But then the famous producer they worked with was so obsessed with Pac-Man, he totally ignored them. Great stories coming up. Let's do it. Hey, music junkies. You know, there's something special about a great power ballad. That moment when the music swells, the vocals soar, and you feel every single word cut straight through to your soul. Even if we don't admit it, we all love power ballads if you're a kid of the 80s or 90s. I mean, throughout the 80s and early 90s, power ballads dominated the airwaves, becoming anthems of heartbreak and resilience and raw emotion. I mean, songs, some of them made us cry in our cars. Today, we're going to do something a little different. A few months ago, we did the anatomy of a power ballad, where we talked about the songs that led to the invention of the power ballad. This is going to be a sister episode to that, where we're going to talk about female power ballads. We're going to count down classics sung by the great females in rock. But here's the thing. Behind all of these iconic tracks sung by women that I've put together in this list, a man wrote the song. That's right. Check the songwriting credits. Guys were crafting the melodies, they were writing the lyrics, shaping the stories. In some cases, they were the co-writers, but for some of these, they get full credit as songwriters. They had to write from a female perspective, and the females brought it to life. So let's get into it. Coming in at number 7, it's a song that the front woman of this band said was a straight-up, cold-blooded attempt to sell out. I'm being dead serious here. From their 1994 album, The Last of the Independents, the song is I'll Stand By You by the Pretenders. I'll stand by you. Now, is this one too pop for the Pretenders? A lot of fans thought so. In fact, some hardcore Pretenders fans feel like it's an artistic betrayal. The song was beneath the Pretenders. Even lead singer Chrissie Hynde had mixed feelings about the song. Hynde was famously adverse to writing commercial hits, but honestly, after a long stretch of disappointing sales, she made a calculated decision to write a Billboard Hot 100 smash. She wanted a hit, she got it. I mean, it was the middle of the 90s, and they hadn't had a hit in ages, so, you know, the pressure was there. They wanted to do it. So to get a bona fide hit, she hired the hit makers, Billy Steinberg and Tom Kelly, and they wrote a top 40 single. We've talked about Billy Steinberg and Tom Kelly. I've interviewed Billy. These two are already legends in the music industry by this point. Steinberg and Kelly had put together an incredible resume as songwriters. We talk about men who wrote some of the biggest female hits ever. In fact, all their number one hits were sung by females. They helped Madonna top the charts with Like a Virgin, Cyndi Lauper with True Colors, Whitney Houston with So Emotional, the Bangles with Eternal Flame, and Heart with Alone. Steinberg had also written hits for the Divinyls, Pat Benatar, Tina Turner, and Linda Ronstadt. And really, the list goes on. Chrissie Hynde, who typically wrote alone, was teaming up with a master. Well, a couple of masters, and she knew it. Over a 2-week period in Los Angeles, the trio wrote several songs, including the dramatic power ballad, I'll Stand By You. The chorus lyric and the title, that all came from Steinberg's notebook. But despite setting out to write a commercially successful song, Hynde got cold feet about the whole endeavor. In fact, she wasn't in love with the finished product and is reported to have said, I'll Stand By You was shite, S-H-I-T. Exact word she used. She was worried that the song was too soft or too generic for the Pretenders' famously tough rock style, their cred. Even Steinberg himself admitted he felt a little sheepish about the song's conventional nature. It's pretty generic, I'll Stand By You. However, Hynde's reservations were alleviated when she played the song for two girls who were not in the music business, and by the end of it, they were both crying in tears. Chrissie was like, okay, maybe it's not as bad as I thought it was. The feedback from these two girls, it convinced Chrissie that I'll Stand By You tapped into something universal, and she greenlit the release. I'll Stand By You became one of the Pretenders' biggest sellers. And it was a career high point for them. It went to number 16 on the Hot 100 in the middle of the 90s. It became their last big hit. Here's what Billy told me about it.
It was based on a lyric that I had in my notebook, and I was quite aware that I had inverted Stand By Me and made it I'll Stand By You. Yeah. The origins of the song, as far as I know, is that Sam Cooke wrote a song for the Soul Stirrers called Stand By Me, Father.
Yep.
And then Benny King did Stand By Me. And then I came up with the idea, I'll Stand By You. And then we wrote it with Chrissie. I remember when we wrote it, I felt like we've written a great ballad here. And I felt a little like, ooh, is it a Pretenders song? Because it felt so kind of mainstream in a way.
Very different from anything they'd done. Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if she had doubts in her own mind. Is this a Pretenders song or is this just a great ballad? But she did cut it, and Bob Clearmountain did an amazing mix on the record, and the rest is history.
One last note on I'll Stand By You. Actually, all these years later, it is the Pretenders' biggest hit, according to streaming. If you look on Spotify and other streamers, it's their biggest hit. She called it shite, their biggest hit. Crazy. So at number 6, I got a big one with a singer that should have been much bigger. I got Black Velvet, one of those sultry, smoldering tracks of the late 80s. Or really ever. The song became Alana Miles' signature hit, reaching number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1990. Now, the story of how it came together is really fascinating. It's a song about the king, Elvis Presley, written by two men specifically for a female voice. Christopher Ward was inspired to write Black Velvet while on assignment for Much Music, which is Canada's version of MTV. In the summer of 1987, they sent him to Memphis to cover the 10th anniversary of Elvis's death. Said Ward about it, they put me and a camera operator on a tour bus with 40 Elvis fanatics, which was an experience unto itself. I came to understand what the incredible passion was that these people had for this man, and what he really represented to all of them. We ended up calling the television special Mecca in Memphis. During that bus ride, deep into the South, Ward had a lot of time to think and to make notes. He started to imagine what it might have been like when Elvis was a child growing up in the South. Now, according to Christopher Ward, the crucial line in the song is a new religion that will bring you to your knees. I love that line. He said he wrote it because he was reading about Southern Christian preachers and how they would exhort members of their congregations. He realized this was the same way that Elvis exhorted his fans when he would sing. He felt like there was a genuine parallel between that power of religion and the power that Elvis Presley possessed in bringing rock and roll to the people. You ain't nothing but... Christopher Ward teamed up with record producer David Tyson, and they crafted the song. They created really a track that perfectly captured the passion and the religious fervor surrounding the king. But they both knew the song's success would be dependent on who sang it. They needed a specific voice for this thing. They needed Alana Miles. Ward and Miles had met at a party years earlier and became partners. They were living together for about 8 years. Ward had been writing songs for Alana and working on her career when he and Tyson finished writing Black Velvet. They knew it was something special, and they knew that Alana was perfect for us. Now, when Alana recorded her vocals, she did it on one of the hottest days of the year in Toronto. She recalled saying, "It was about 99 degrees and it was very humid. I was in this basement studio with no air conditioning. Now, it felt like the song needed to sound like it was Memphis on a hot, sweaty day. And it was so hot, you had to take your shirt off. Well, subsequently, it was so hot, I had to take my shirt off. I was wearing a bathing suit, of course." So while Alana's blues rock single was climbing the pop charts, her label Atlantic, it hedged its bets by having country singer Robin Lee record her own version of the same song for the country market, or maybe to cross over. And actually, Robin's track went to number 12 on the Billboard Country chart, so there's that. I don't know why he would release two versions of the same song at the same time, but the strategy of simultaneous competing releases from the label featuring an almost identical track was a ruthless move, and of course demonstrated how badly the label wanted to dominate radio with this song. Here in the US, Black Velvet became Alana's defining moment. Now, we think of her as a one-hit wonder here in America, but she actually had another top 40 hit with her single Love Is.
What you want it to be, love is, love is.
Back in Canada, she had 9 top 40 hits, including one number 1, which wasn't Black Velvet. Her north of the border number 1 was a song called Song Instead of a Kiss.
Song instead of a touch.
And actually, Black Velvet only went to number 10 in Canada. All right, coming in number 5, we got a song that we've covered a couple of times on here, but I just came upon a couple of new stories about it that I wasn't aware of. I think you're going to like this. So number 5, I've got Berlin with their Top Gun soundtrack smash, the number 1 smash, Take My Breath Away. Take My Breath Away is hands down one of the most iconic love songs of the 80s. It won the Oscar for Best Original Song in 86, and it became Berlin's biggest hit. It reached number 1, like I said, on the Hot 100. But there's a dark side to this song's success. It's actually responsible for breaking up the band. Here's where it gets interesting, though. Take My Breath Away, of course, were written by the legendary producer Giorgio Moroder and lyricist Tom Whitlock, specifically for Top Gun. Of course, Moroder also composed Danger Zone. But get this, apparently both songs were offered to Berlin. They were given a choice to which one they wanted to record. Of course, Danger Zone has a lengthy list of artists who turned it down. There was Berlin, Starship, R.E.O. Speedwagon, Bryan Adams, Toto, amongst many others. Then Kenny Loggins, of course, recorded it. But according to Berlin's lead singer Terry Nunn, Giorgio wanted Danger Zone to be a duet. Can you imagine that? Berlin wasn't into that idea, and the band liked Take My Breath Away better out of the two anyway. At least Terry did. But Tom Whitlock wrote the lyrics after listening to Moroder's music. He'd been working on the score for Top Gun as an assistant engineer, and so he'd seen most of the movie by this time, and he wrote the songs. Actually, I read that Tom Cruise and Kelly McGillis' love scene had to be re-edited to fit Take My Breath Away later. They had to choreograph the sex scene to fit the song exactly. Remembering how it all went down, Terry said, and I quote, Giorgio originally had a strange arrangement on it, which she and the band liked better, but Giorgio had both the record company and the movie company asking him to be normal, as normal in the arrangement as possible because they wanted it to be a hit. So he couldn't be as experimental. And maybe this is where the rest of the band withdrew their support. The finished result was a sweeping romantic ballad tailor-made for Terry's voice, and it was massive. But the success came with a cost. No one other than Terry liked the song, actually. Not even Berlin's manager, Perry Watts Russell, believed in it. Said Terry, when it first came into the Hot 100, he said, there's no chance. He said, if this gets to the top 5, I'll get a mohawk. We waited till it went top 3, but in spite of Take My Breath Away's commercial triumph, or maybe because of it, the rest of the band could not get on board with it. They saw it as an outsider's track. It wasn't their song. And Berlin was already exhausted from nonstop work by this point. They not only hated the song, they hated each other. and Take My Breath Away became the fatal wedge that broke them apart. The hardcore fans, they hated it too. Here's what Terry told me about it.
I was excited about Giorgio. Another song to do with Giorgio. Oh my God. Because he was so expensive. I mean, there was no way if he didn't ask me to do it that we were ever going to afford him. Because at that point, we hadn't even had a top 40 hit yet. So they weren't going to fork over any more money for Giorgio. So that was another connection with him that I jumped on. And it's really why John and I fought, because he didn't want to do it. It wasn't a Berlin written song, but I was like, yeah, but Giorgio, it's, we get to do something else with him. Let's do this. And, the label just said, off, John, you're doing it. This is going to happen. So he really had nothing to, no say in the matter. And that pissed him off even more. And I can understand that. He's been really honest about it.
All right, in at number 4, we have what I consider to be the greatest female rock singer ever, Heart, with the power ballad, What About Love?
What about love? Don't you want someone to care about you?
This was actually recorded in 1982, 3 years before Heart got their hands on it. The song was written by Brian Allen and Sharon Alton, who were members of the band Toronto. Also the great Jim Valance, famed for co-writing most of Bryan Adams' biggest hits. For some strange reason, Toronto never released their original version of What About Love as a single, though. But it showed up on Heart's radar while they were working on their 1985 self-titled comeback album. Now, we've talked about this before. Heart was under the gun by this point in their career. The early 80s had not been kind to the band, and they were in dire need of some hits if they were going to survive. Ann Wilson even thought it was over. This meant, like it or not, they had to bring in songs written by outside songwriters, song doctors. In fact, most of their biggest hits in the 80s came from so-called song doctors, songwriting specialists, if you will. There was Never, These Dreams, Nothing at All, Alone, Who Will You Run To, There's the Girl, and What About Love?
Never, these dreams go on when I close my eyes. Nothing at all. Who will you run to when it all falls down? Yeah. 'Cause there's a girl. What about love? Don't let it slip away.
All these co-written tracks went top 12 or better on the top 40. And most of these are the songs that saved their career, especially this otherworldly high note on Alone. That one cemented their legacy after years of struggle. But that didn't mean the Heart had to like it. In fact, Ann Wilson explained in Heart's autobiography, Kicking and Dreaming, that when her sister Nancy heard the demo for What About Love, she hated it. She stormed out of the room. She wanted to throw it against the wall. Their producer, Ron Bad Medicine Nevison, had to talk the duo down from the ledge by promising them they could sing the song their way. And, he said, no one in the audience is going to know that you didn't write it. Ann later admitted that he was right, at least about Heart being able to do it their own way. What About Love became the showstopper of Heart's live set, though. It was also one of the first tracks they cut in the studio and one of the first the brass at Capitol heard. And it was enough to secure them their next album when they were teetering on the brink of collapse. Said Ann, industry executive Don Grierson told me that as he played it to the conference room of suits, many of who had been reluctant to sign us in the first place, this is the song that won them over. So every Heart fan knows just what a powerhouse Ann Wilson is behind the mic. And like I said earlier, she would secure her place in history on Heart's next album, Bad Animals, with her performance of Alone, one of the greatest power ballads of all time, period. But we've covered that one extensively here on the channel, so I wanted to give some love to What About Love. I bring this up because while What About Love may not be as technically difficult to sing as Alone, Ann kills it on this song. And it's no walk in the park. It's up there as one of Heart's most difficult songs to sing, and of course, Ann is otherworldly on it. All right, coming in at number 3 position on the countdown, we have a song we've never discussed on our channel, but it's one of the best of the early 80s. Quarterflash with Harden My Heart. Do you remember this one? Quarterflash originated in Portland, Oregon, evolving from a local band called Seafood Mama in the late 70s. That's right, they were called Seafood Mama. The core of the band was the married couple lead singer and saxophonist Randy Ross and songwriting guitarist Marv Ross. Now, initially, they were working as school teachers by day and performing, as a band on the weekends. They achieved some regional success in the Pacific Northwest with Marv's composition Harden My Heart, which they actually recorded independently in their basement. Said Marv about the song, "A friend of mine gave me the title, and I came up with the lyrics very quickly thereafter. The title came first, and I don't remember how the rest came about at all. I usually write the music and the words, simultaneously. It wasn't a personal story, I just made it up. The chords are simple, but voiced so to make it sound more complex than it really is. The whole song is really the groove, which we called a shuffle in those days. Randy came up with a sax line. The whole thing was written in less than a week and recorded in our basement for the Seafood Mama version." Harden My Heart became a grassroots hit, though. Sold over 10,000 copies just locally and started attracting national attention from major labels. After signing with Geffen, they changed their name to Quarterflash, which was derived from the Australian slang. Marv explained that it meant 1/4 flash and 3/4 of foolishness or stupidity. But then they re-recorded Harden My Heart with Los Angeles studio musicians, turning into the polished international smash hit that we all know and love. Harden My Heart was a massive hit. It peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1982. The band's distinctive sound was defined, of course, by Randy's dynamic, soulful vocals and a prominent use of the saxophone, really rare combo that set them apart from other new wave and AOR acts of the era. Their self-titled 1981 debut album went platinum and spun off a second top 20 hit, Find Another Fool. Quarterflash followed up this success with their 1983 gold album, Take Another Picture, that featured the top 40 single, Take Me to Heart.
Do you want me? Take me to heart.
Despite initial momentum, though, the band struggled to maintain commercial success with subsequent releases thereafter. Though their chart success was concentrated in the early 80s, Marv and Randy Ross maintained a lasting personal and musical partnership, releasing more albums in 1985, 1991, and 3 more this side of the new millennium. All right, I've been dying to tell you this. I ran across this story about Quarterflash a couple of weeks ago when I was reading this old book I have. Got to tell you guys, it's funny. The band had another single that didn't do as well on the charts, but you probably remember it's from the movie Night Shift. Do you remember the movie Night Shift? Really funny. It was Michael Keaton's first movie, and it had Henry Winkler and Shelley Long. Great movie if you haven't seen it.
It makes the day seem dead by comparison.
This is one that Marv wrote with one of his heroes, the late, great Burt Bacharach, legend. Marv thought that this songwriting experience would be a career fantasy fulfilled. He was so excited. He was going to work with a legend. However, the songwriting process took a backseat progress to Burt Bacharach's Pac-Man obsession. Yeah, Burt Bacharach was obsessed with Pac-Man. And according to Marv Ross, during their writing sessions, Burt was so glued to the arcade game, he really wouldn't pay attention. Ross described the absurdity of the moment. Here they were, trying to craft a song together, while one of the greatest composers of the 20th century was perpetually playing the electronic ghost-chasing game and getting frustrated with it that he couldn't master it.
All night on the night shift.
All right, let's move on to number 2 on our countdown, our coveted bridesmaid position. Look sharp, Roxette, listen to your heart.
When he's calling for you, listen to your heart.
You know, Roxette's American breakthrough, it's one of the most unlikely stories in rock history. Seriously, in 1988, their debut album, Pearls of Passion, was a localized hit. It went to number 2 in Sweden, but it failed to chart everywhere else. In the States, they were unknown. All that changed, though, thanks to an American exchange student named Dean Cushman. Get this, in late 1988, Dean was studying in Sweden when a friend urged him to take a copy of Roxette's second album, Look Sharp, back home to Minneapolis over the Christmas break. Dean, he worked part-time at a Minneapolis radio station, and he brought the album to the program director at KDWB. This is a 101.3 FM. Now, the station was hesitant to play it, but the song The Look, it was so instantly catchy that they threw it into the rotation not thinking much of it. The response was overwhelming. Listeners went crazy for it. And with that exchange student sharing that one import, it led to 5 #1 hits. Yeah, 5 #1 hits. Soon other major market stations got their hands on the track and they started playing it.
Kissing is a color, a loving is a wild dog. She's got the look.
I mean, the single wasn't even officially available for purchase in the US. It hadn't been released. But it became an out-of-nowhere phenomenon. This just doesn't happen anymore. This organic buzz, it forced Capitol Records to act fast. The label scrambled to sign the duo, and Rush released the single The Look, and it hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1989, rocketing Roxette from Swedish obscurity to international fame. But it was Roxette's power ballad Listen to Your Heart that secured their place in pop history. Listen to Your Heart was written by the male half of Roxette, Per Gessle, specifically for Marie to sing. Ah, Marie, what a voice. Per wrote the lyrics first and then the music. Said Per about it, "It's a traditional power ballad. We wanted to loosen it up a bit at the end using trumpets and a horn section. We were really inspired by the best of everything from Tom Petty's Southern accents. We really listened to that one a lot." Writing for a female vocalist gave Per a different perspective, though. He was crafting something that would showcase Marie's incredible voice and allow it to truly soar on radio. And it worked like a charm. Marie's performance, absolutely stunning on this and so many of her songs. Now, digging in even deeper, the lyrics of Listen to Your Heart were not only written by a man for a woman, but also from the perspective of a man who was going through a divorce. Said Per, "That's one of the rare occasions when I wrote the story about a very good friend of mine who went through a difficult divorce. We actually sat up all night discussing the problem. When it went to #1 in the States, I got this fax from him telling me, 'Hey, it's great. You and me and Marie are #1 in America.'" Also, another thing that people forget, there were actually 2 different versions of Listen to Your Heart that were being played on the radio at the same time. It definitely confused many listeners, but it still became a smash. All right, for the Can-Tan's honorable mention, I'm going to go a little more off the beaten path here. I've got the Runaways with the title track from their 3rd album, Waiting for the Night. This is a good song. You should check it out. So this is kind of wild. The Runaways were, of course, marketed as an all-female, all-girl band. For their first album released in 1976, their lineup consisted of lead singer Cherie Currie, guitarist Joan Jett, and lead of Ford bassist Jackie Fox and drummer Sandy West. By their 3rd album, Waiting for the Night, dropped a year and a half later in October 77, the lineup was actually down to 4, missing Cherie Currie, and Jackie Fox was replaced by Vicky Blue on bass. But really, the point is, this was an all-girl band. So that being said, you might think it's a little weird that their power ballad, Waiting for the Night, was not only co-written by a guy, but also the bass parts were played by a secret session player who also happened to be a guy, though credited to the all-girl band. Now, this was supposed to stay a secret because, they were known as the all-girl band. First off, the writing credits for this go to Joan Jett, Carrie Crone, and Kim Fowley. For those not familiar, Kim Fowley is actually a man. He was a musician, producer, and songwriter who also managed the Runaways. As far as the bass situation goes, according to an early 2004 music review, the vast majority of bass lines on the album, including this on the title track, were widely believed to have been played by an uncredited session musician named Sal Maida of Roxy Music fame. The song itself is a document of a band in deep turmoil, with the public-facing lineup not exactly matching the reality of the recording studio. It's just another strange story in the world of women's power ballads. It's crazy. All right, we're at #1. Coming in at #1 position, it was easy. Bonnie Tyler with Total Eclipse of the Heart.
There's nothing I can do, a total eclipse of the heart.
Total Eclipse of the Heart is one of the most dramatic power ballads ever recorded, one of the most dramatic songs ever recorded. Written by the late, great Jim Steinman, it's a song about monsters getting it on, specifically vampires. Now, for some time, Jim had been working on a musical version of Nosferatu, and Total Eclipse was a key track for that project. Said Steinman about it, if anyone listens to the lyrics, they're really like vampire lines. It's all about the darkness, the power of darkness and love's place in the dark. But shifting the story over to Bonnie in 1981, she severed all ties with her managers. Her previous team, Scott and Steve Wolf, had written and produced her number 3 hit, It's a Heartache, back in '77. But 4 years and 2 studio albums would pass without any Billboard chart success. Bonnie ultimately signed a new management and was given the freedom to select songs and a new producer. Said Tyler about it, I'd always been a big fan of Phil Spector and the huge sound that he used to get. The only producer who can get that epic sound nowadays is Jim Steinman. So when I asked about possible producers, he was at the top of my list, though I didn't really think he'd do it. Now, Steinman had famously paired with Meat Loaf for Bat Out of Hell in 1977, churning out 3 top 40 hits and one of the biggest selling albums ever. Top 40 hits, of course, You Took the Words Right Out of My Mouth, 2 Out of 3 Ain't Bad, and Paradise by the Dashboard Light.
And then you took the words right out of my mouth. Was 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
CBS Records approached Steinman about producing Bonnie, but he was working on another project at the time and he declined. But then one day he called out of the blue and said if she hadn't found a producer, he was interested. Bonnie was excited. She flew to New York to meet Steinman at his apartment. Bonnie recalled that he played her Blue Oyster Cult's Going Through the Motions and CCR's Have You Ever Seen the Rain. Both of these songs were a test. Steinman later told her that if she hadn't liked them, he would have called the partnership off. Then he went to his grand piano and he played Total Eclipse of the Heart. Bonnie was blown away. She knew she had to sing that song. She knew she had to be the one to deliver it. It was a guaranteed hit.
Turn around.
Bonnie recorded Total Eclipse for her album Faster Than the Speed of Night, and it was released as a single in February of 1983 and of course went number 1 across the board. Both sides of the Atlantic, the US and the UK. It also reached the top spot in Australia, Canada, Ireland, New Zealand, Norway, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. And the music video, man, that's something else. It's as bizarre as it is beautiful. It was shot in a Gothic insane asylum called the Holloway Sanitarium. The building was reportedly haunted, especially in the basement where electric shock therapy had been performed. In fact, it was so creepy that even the estate security dogs refused to go down there on patrol. I guess it's a fitting backdrop for a song about, vampires getting it on. Anyway, if you want a play-by-play breakdown, you got to check out the literal version of the music video. It's great. Okay, so then there was Meat Loaf. He wasn't too happy with this whole situation, Total Eclipse of the Heart. For years, he claimed that Jim Steinman had written Total Eclipse for him. It was supposed to be his career-defining hit. However, both Jim Steinman and Bonnie Tyler have repeatedly denied this. Jim insisted that he wrote the song as a showpiece for Bonnie's voice specifically. And man, was it ever. So, Meat Loaf said it was written for him. Who knows? There are different stories that go around, but nobody could have sang that song like Bonnie Tyler. Just a great song. All right, so there you have it. All female power ballads written by guys. That's just an interesting phenomenon. There's a lot out there. I mean, there's plenty that are written by females, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting take on a lot of these great ones. What are your great power ballads of all time? Should we do an overall power ballads, guys and girls, or just a guys list? Let me know. These are such great songs. Let me know your memories. Let's have a great discussion below. If you like our content, we invite you to subscribe. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Talk to you soon.